All right.
And so, as you know from studying psychology here and there, that um, that part of being a child is kind of the feeling of being overwhelmed,
Hmm.
that the world is just way too complicated for comprehension for a child. And so we start selectively shutting down certain things and keep other avenues open so that we can begin to make sense out of the world that we live in. Okay, this is where NLP talks about in the sense of map making, which fits perfectly into the teachings of the Buddha and also most psychology, especially those who are fans of Freud's developmental psychology, because it really fits in that whole way of the development of the child. But that foundation then interferes with our life as we live it today. In other words, we start patterns or we start habits when we're kids that are hard for us to give up because they're so deeply ingrained that we don't even notice. We don't see them
Hmm.
until we begin with Anapanasati to take a really close look at this stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like I've been doing quite a lot of that in the past months, like just getting to know my own like patterns. I
Mm-hmm.
think I mentioned that in the last talk already. I'm not sure. Um, and I noticed that I like probably have my thinking thingies again in my forehead. Um, that I react like I have this pattern of trying to do everything well and being good, and it causes a lot of stress. And I freak out whenever anything or anybody gives me the feeling that I'm not good enough. Actually, I notice some patterns of how I cope with that. Like one thing is just I kind of zone out.
Mm-hmm.
Another
Okay.
one is I start getting really angry with myself, like putting myself down.
Oh, you
Like,
start to agree with them.
yeah,
The guys in your head that are telling you you're no good, now you are agreeing with them and angry at you because your anger agrees with your ignorance. Okay,
yeah,
I'm hearing you.
maybe that feels safer. I'm not quite sure why I do that, but um, there's I also get like physical reactions actually, like I start cramping up. That started in the past months and getting these jerky movements all through my upper body. Um, so that's still sort of new, and I wonder if that's around to stay. And I noticed in one talk that was really interesting with my girlfriend, when I talked about that and that I was really anxious of doing well on the next day when I had a lot of sessions with my clients to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually realized that I was angry, that I was afraid of them getting angry at me for not doing well for them. And that was sort of a childlike feeling, like this, I'm not going to be
Mm-hmm.
good enough. And I
Mm-hmm.
had impulse to be
Exactly.
angry
That's
with
what
myself.
we started right from the very beginning. So it's great now that you're beginning to see that stuff.
Yeah.
Congratulations, you're beginning to wake up finally to recognize that you're driven by old patterns
Mm.
that are no longer appropriate. That you're feeling the way that you did as you were with a kid. Now, here's something interesting. Maybe we can talk about it like this. What was it that happened when you were a kid that you felt put you in the position of being a failure or worthy of the ridicule? That part that you get angry at. Where do you have a memory of that, or do you have times when you remember feeling that way?
Um, I I'm sure it's quite a lot of more subtle memories instead of one
Okay.
big traumatic thing or so.
So it
I
was one little trauma after another that mounted up rather than one big deal.
right, yeah.
That happens to everyone. You
Yeah,
know
so
that
that,
from psychology, that, yeah, that sometimes it's just one thing that happens and then the kid's nuts for the rest of his life because of that one thing that keeps getting stuck in the brain.
yeah.
To where most of us is a piling on. And
Yeah,
so,
so that's what frustrated me for a long time because I felt like I didn't even have a right to feel this way because I couldn't find this one cause. Um,
a
so
right to
now
feel what way?
to feel, yeah, to feel bad, basically feel bad about myself or anxious. And I felt like that's, I think, also a bit where the anger partly came from, that I felt like I just got to push through and have more self-discipline and so on and so on. Because
So
it,
perhaps maybe
we,
this is an internal cheerleader that's telling you to get off your butt. You can do better than this. Stop feeling so bad.
mm,
And since you're not getting up off your butt, is now getting pissed off at you.
something like that, yeah. It's very, very helpful. Works great.
Okay, so maybe we need to then figure out another way of looking at what needs to be done. Because in fact, the way that you feel about being judged is something that you're making up right now. No one at your office, none of the supervisors, none of the ones who are big PhD psychiatrists, none of those guys cares about you because they're too busy caring about themselves.
Mm,
So you are not being judged the way that you think that you're being judged. In fact, the only judge that you've got is the same judge that they have, and that's themselves.
mm,
Isn't that interesting? That's who judges us the most. And so what we really need to do is begin to see this judgment system and recognize that we don't have to subject ourselves to this judgment by putting other people's face on it, in the sense of putting your client's face on the judge, that the clients are going to be angry at you. When in fact it's not the clients at all. They're quite grateful. They think you're really good at what you're doing, and you know that, and you're not giving yourself credit for it.
yeah. It's
And so
quite,
that's where anapanasati comes back in, is that give yourself the attitude that you can in fact do this job of helping people feel better about themselves. But if you're worried about how they judge you, then you're not feeling good enough to teach them how to feel good. You're already, in fact, if they want to look at you, they've got to look down because that's where you put yourself, because you're putting them as the judge. You're the one who put yourself into a one down and they're the one up.
yeah.
What we need to do is to bring those kind of thoughts out of it so that you recognize that you are really good at what you're doing, that you do have enormous benefit for people. Put a smile on, and that is the reality of the situation. Is that not true? That's real. Even though you don't feel that way, we have to at least recognize the reality of the situation is everything is going just fine.
Yeah. It's sometimes the feelings can be quite overwhelming for me, and I try to ground myself, but the more I get in contact with my body and what's now, it feels like it gets stronger. So I get like
Okay,
this
well now
urge.
here's one of the ways to start dealing a little bit differently, and that is recognize that these feelings that arise are not, let us say, founded in the logic, that you've already seen the logic, you've already seen reality. And the reality is there's no reason for these feelings to be there. That's only the first way, that's the first wisdom then, is to recognize that, in fact, there is no logical reason for these feelings to be there, but they're there anyway.
Like this is not coming out of the now, it's coming from something
Coming
that's
from
not there
coming
anymore.
from the past. It's coming from the past. And when I mention this to the students, I mention it over and over again. But then eventually the students get to the point like you're at, and they're beginning to see it face to face. You're beginning to recognize that these feelings that you've had, and for this is not a new feeling that you've got. You had that feeling before you met me. You had that feeling when we were talking, and now you are having that feeling, but you darn well know it now. You can see it.
Yeah, what's interesting now is I can see the triggers and how often that is triggered in my daily life. So that's more stressful in a way in the situation, but it's not this foggy thing anymore that's over
But
everything.
that too is not stressful. It is exhilarating. Look, you've got new toys. You're beginning to figure this thing out.
Hmm.
But the old habit is, oh, this is too much. Oh, this is complicated. Oh, one more trigger. Oh, no. Rather than saying, okay, I'm going to take a look at this and I'm going to be quite joyful over the fact that I can get this job done. I can get over this. Error how intense these feelings feel right now. Part of the intensity is because you're now paying attention to them. In the old days, they didn't have to be so strong to control you. But now that you're waking up, these feelings sometimes have to get really, really strong in order to make you do what they want you to do.
Yeah. Like I noticed after I did some yoga 3 days ago or so, and I noticed in yoga it challenges me more to stay in the moment than in meditation. When I'm just sitting, it's a bit easier for me to totally um, drift away. And I was getting really frustrated for myself because my body was so tight and I couldn't do the bends and so on. And I was quite overwhelmed afterwards, and I felt like I couldn't get myself back to the now. I felt a bit dissociated actually, like really tight in my head. I couldn't get out
Uh-huh.
anymore.
And all you needed to say to yourself was, no, I'm not. I can come out of this. Let me take a deep breath. And in fact, that state that you're talking about being in is probably associated with not breathing very well. It's a closed down, tight.
Hmm.
And so by remembering to take a deep breath and remember that you are in fact in charge of your life, not your old past.
Mhm.
And the only time that you can do that is when you remember to do it. And when you forget, the old past takes over. And when you remember, now you're in charge. So you can begin to breathe deeply. You can begin to have the kind of thoughts that are worth having. And so the kind of thought that's worth having is I can service my customers, I can deal with my clients very well and give them enormous value. Positive can do attitude, because you know that's true. Your bosses have already put you in that position. If they didn't think that you were ready to see people, you wouldn't be seeing them.
Hmm.
But you can't give them the attitude that you've got. You got to give them a better attitude. Both you and the client deserves a better attitude out of you.
Hmm.
Hmm? Is that true? You think that
Yeah.
they're judging you, and so therefore you feel bad. Is that the attitude that you want to have with them, or do you want to have the attitude of wow, let's figure this stuff out together.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
I guess
so
it's one
that's
of the four steps to remember.
that's the attitude. We got to change our attitude about it.
Hmm.
I'm glad you called because you need to be reminded of this. Probably I've told you before the story about good advice. Good advice is really easy to come by. Everybody's got good advice: doctors, lawyers, preachers, interns, teachers, uncles. Everybody's got good advice. The problem with good advice is that we don't take it when we need to the most. At the
Hmm.
most dangerous point in time is when we forget to follow the good advice. Is that right? It's Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and it'll go wrong at the worst possible moment. And so, this is actually Murphy's Law of the mind. We will forget, we will not wake up, we will lose our sati just at the point when we need it the most. And so, my only job today is to remind you of that. So
Hmm.
you can, in fact, do that. You can remember when those feelings come that those feelings are not you, and that those feelings do not have, let us say, associated thoughts with the present moment. That the present moment is just fine. That these feelings that are coming up come up because they're capable of coming up, and they come up like a jack in the box. Error how slowly you turn that crank, that jack in the box is going to come up. And so here it comes up. And that happens with everybody. And our job is to put it back in its box and close the lid and happily go on, knowing that they go off like that.
Hmm.
And then they won't so much happen. And it won't be so intense later, only because you're not giving it any energy now. It's like a barking dog. If if you've got a dog barking in the yard, if you know dog psychology enough that you start barking too, that you're the male, uh, alpha male, the dominant of the species, and therefore, if the human starts barking too, then that means that the dog in the yard was right all along, and he becomes even more vicious now that he's got a human on the porch barking also.
Hmm.
I've seen that happen more often. I mean, it's quite a toy to play with. And so um, that shows that we do that for ourselves. We're the barking dog, and then when we bark at the barking dog, that it goes all over the place. And so what we need to do is to have the idea of down boy, you're okay. Everything is safe. No need to be barking right now. No need to have these heavy feelings. And that's exactly what's happening all over the place with this Corona 19 virus, is that people are at home to the point that they have quite a lovely time, a lovely day, and yet they're all worried.
Hmm.
They're thinking of the worst thing that could happen. The right way to handle that is do whatever we need to do to figure out what the reality really is. And in the coronavirus, it would be stay indoors and use mask and um, stay away from people, do that kind of thing. And then if there's a temperature, we need to take more action. But until there's a temperature or a cough, etc., like that. So we're following information. Now that we're following information, there's no reason to feel worried or threatened or run to the grocery store and buy up all the toilet paper. There's no reason for any of that. And yet, this is the way that the human mind works. But now we're doing it exactly the same thing. These feelings that you have that want you to rush to the grocery store and take and buy all the toilet paper so that your patients will love you.
That's the way.
It's that mental cycle that we go through, and when we put it in such humorous terms, we can recognize, oh, yeah, right. It's just so inappropriate for me to feel that way when I'm not even doing good justice to my clients when I feel that way.
Yeah, one of the other coping mechanisms that I've found is like fleeing to the future and trying to prepare a lot and control a lot to the point where it's not even noticing so much anymore if that's effective anymore. It's just the feeling of control that I want.
Well, that's going to fail now, isn't it? I mean, if you're not even controlling these feelings that you got, how can you control the whole rest of the place, including everybody else's feelings?
Yeah. It's it's trying to deal with the feeling in a very roundabout way instead of going directly to it.
Yeah, that's the way it is to start dealing with that feeling directly by paying attention to it. Notice it, recognize that it's got no foundation in fact, and yet still there it is. The next thing that we can do is we can kind of identify where it is in the body and start paying attention then to that area of the body. If we can find a place in the body that most clearly identifies with this feeling of, oh, I've got to do something or I'll be seen as a failure, kind of thought system that feeling is raveling around. If you can find where that is in the body, then that's good. That's more investigation. Some people will find that it's in the chest area. Some will find that it's in the gut. Others will find that it's in the throat. Wherever those things are, we need to identify them in the sense of, I am not that feeling that is just associated with the body. So now we're making a disassociation that's quite valuable and wholesome. You are not that feeling. And that feeling does not conform to reality of the moment. I'd rather be here now than be that feeling. And so we recognize you're not that feeling. You are not it. Once we see that we are not the feeling, that's actually quite profound. You're not the body, you're not the feeling. That whoever you are, you're not that. In a way, you're better than that. How much better are you? It depends upon your own mind. How high-minded can you be? Which is what we would call the nobility, the noble mind, the mind that's free and above all of the feelings, so that yes, while the feelings may come and go, they don't affect the mind. That in fact nobody becomes completely free of their instincts, nor would we want to. If we completely ignored all danger, that might be very dangerous. To ignore all danger. So we need to be able to see danger so that we can best deal with it. And there's so many very clear examples. The one that I like is a very humorous one, is Jesus walked into the temple, threw out the money changers, and within a week they had been nailed up. He did the right thing, but the point that he made ticked a whole lot of people off. So we have to be careful with doing the right thing. Another one in that same example is Socrates. The reason he drank poison was because of two factors. One was that he told him that he wasn't going to shut up and he wasn't leaving. He was going to stay there and continue to teach what he had been teaching, which was let's not go to war. And the ones who wanted to go to war were the ones who poisoned him. But his whole point, he went around town telling every teenager who would listen to him, don't join the army. Don't join. But you could see that that was dangerous for him to do, is to speak that kind of truth. But it was still worthwhile doing. So this is how we begin to see our own life, is that we're going to have also a noble mind, but we do not want to disregard danger. We want to use it as part of the repertoire so that we can do an excellent job without pissing off the wrong people.
Yeah, so use it as information instead of sort of being taken over by it.
By it, right? Exactly. That the danger no longer runs us. That we control our feelings in the sense of we're the emperor. I like that idea, that each one of us is an emperor of our own pile of dirt. It's so funny. And yet most people are buried under their own pile of dirt. And the whole teaching of the Buddha is let's come out of from under that pile of dirt and sit on top of it. That way we're on top of the world.
And I'm interested what you think of an experience I had when I was like very anxious about the next day at work, and I stuck with that feeling. Like I think in the past I had an interview with Tucker Peck once, and he classified me as, in the Buddha's terms, as a craving, aversive, and delusive types, I think. He classified me as a delusive type, not being aware of my feelings. And I feel like sometimes just trying to get rid of them, I try to go out of their way and not even recognize them. Well, what I did then was, with the help of in a talk, with the help of my girlfriend, just stick with the feeling and see what it was asking for. And it actually asked for not trying to get angry at it or push it away, but like to take care of it, and like this childlike feeling to have some care for it.
This is very, very good advice. Because before you'd get angry at it. Now you're not getting angry at these feelings. You're beginning to investigate them. And part of the quality of the investigation is to see that there is nothing happening here now that are worthy of these feelings. That what's happening right now, just in this present moment, is such that I would expect that I wouldn't feel that way. Once we understand that these feelings then have nothing to do with the here now, we also can understand they're not me. They're not mine. They're just old habits. And that's all that they are, just old habits. And so you can actually think of it, I like it to talk about it as a pet. It's a pet dog. It's a pet dog that barks too much. And all we have to do is, first off, recognize, is the dog barking at something real? Or is the dog barking at something imaginary? And if it's barking at something real, we have to take care of it. If it's barking at something imaginary, then we have to tell the dog, shut up, in a very kind way. Down, boy. Okay. Or in the case here, come on, Lucky, which is not angry at the dog for barking, but rather calling the dog in a way that it's non-judgmental. That the dog is going to bark. Our mental dogs are going to bark.
And do you think that there's like gradation? Like, even if there's no current cause to be very anxious, for example, in existential terms, it's not a life risk, but it's sufficiently like it might be very banal things, and then I might want to do more this Jack in the Box or a down boy thing, or if it's a feeling that feels like it goes quite deep or it's quite pervasive,
But it
to
doesn't
spend
matter
more
how
time with
deep
it.
it is. What matters is how can we manage it in this current present moment?
And I
Think
was
about it
wondering
that
if
way. It
it's some.
doesn't matter how deep it is. What matters is how are we going to manage it in this present moment? That down boy is not to permanently shut the dog up. That down boy is to get the dog to shut up right now. Be quiet, be okay. Things are okay. We take a deep breath, we locate where those feelings are, and then as we're breathing deep, we imagine or think about the breath going to that area of the body, soothing it, comforting it, giving it the oxygen that it needs, allowing that feeling and sensation then that gives rise to the feeling to dissipate in a loving, kind way with full knowledge that we don't need to feel that way right now. We don't need to feel like the landlord is banging on the door right now because the landlord is in fact not banging at the door right now.
Hmm. I feel some feelings can be very strong, and then I feel like they
I
may
did
need some
I
more
did
attention than in
I
that.
have not denied that. We're not talking about how strong they are or how deep they are. We're talking about what can we do with them in the present moment. And so now we're addressing something quite different, and that is, are you up to the task? Or are these feelings too big, too deep, too powerful? Or can you do this? Can you come out of your own misery?
Yeah, and feel like sometimes they may need some more attention. Just what can you do with them might be something very quick. It might also be that you need to spend a little bit more time and investigation and care with them.
Mm-hmm. And so part of this investigation part is to begin also to piddle or play with it, to adjust it, to make modifications to it, to locate it in the body, to breathe into it, to begin to recognize that you're in charge of these feelings. The feelings are not the boss here.
Hmm.
That you can manipulate and play with these feelings. And you can also um, congratulate yourself for doing this. And so now you feel really good. Wow, I'm glad I don't feel that way right now.
Hmm.
Because these feelings are nothing but a kind of a hindrance. And you're digging down to that level where you're seeing that. And I congratulate you for that. Most students never get down to this layer of recognizing how by the throat our feelings have us.
Hmm.
And so I will give you that. And sometimes it feels like these feelings have you by the throat, literally, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to give some tension in the throat in this area of the body. So maybe that needs to be relaxed also.
Yeah.
So, yes, these feelings feel like that they're in charge, but they're not.
Yeah, it's more
And
like.
you are not their victim, you're their boss. Now, is that good psychology or what?
Yeah, it feels sometimes like in schema therapy, they talk about the healthy parent,
Mhm.
healthy adult, where you sort of want to go towards, which is actually like a mode that takes care of all the other modes, like the
Mhm.
detached protector and the vulnerable child and angry child and blah, blah, blah. So this, I think, kind of the noble part of the mind, you could say, that takes care and manages the other ones. And that's sort of how it felt like that in that moment too. Like I could choose not to be angry at this vulnerable part and all these quite strong feelings, but to take like have some more compassion actually with it. Then it
Mhm.
subsided quite quickly, and with that, the anxiety of the next day also
Now, if
subsided.
I had promised you that, you wouldn't have believed me. Tell me what you just told me again.
That when I took good care of that and stuck with it, instead of just reacting, the I guess you could say pain subsided quite quickly.
Okay. Now that you know that, that's part of your budding shraddha, your confidence that you can get rid of it this time, you can get rid of it next time also.
Mm.
And this is part of what we mean by one's right noble attitude is that can do attitude. You can deal with this stuff. And it is actually when you do deal with it, how surprisingly easy it is to deal with.
Mm.
But so long as we're afraid of dealing with it, it's the boogeyman. It's the one who runs the show.
Mm.
But once we take over and say, you're not the boss of me anymore, or in that loving, kind way of down, boy, sit, be quiet.
Yeah.
And so this is a way of working with Anapanasati, that this is, in fact, Anapanasati's major use, because these feelings that you have are actually hindrances, but they're hindrances that you see now that you didn't see 6 months ago.
Mm.
And so being glad that you can see this stuff at a deeper level that you've ever seen it before, and that you've already been successful at digging in a shallow grave, now you're digging in a deeper grave, you can still stand it. You can still manage this. You can still win.
That sounds a bit like I'm digging my own grave.
Well, this the grave of the self, exactly so. Yes, the grave of the one who clings to these feelings.
Hmm.
In a way, we can think of the real owner of the feelings is this self that needs to be protected. That these feelings, in fact, are the response of the self-preservation instinct trying to protect a self that really doesn't exist.
Hmm.
And so when you recognize that these old feelings are just trying to protect something that I don't really need anyway, then we can say, okay, that's how useless these feelings really are. And that's when even they want to sit down and be quiet. That all is well. Things are comfortable. We're satisfied. We're no longer dissatisfied.
Yeah. So I think it concerns also a bit of a balance between this pragmatic. This is this is not a real danger, like, and I can just tell it to stand back, stand down.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what made a bit of a difference for me is because I have this anger with myself then in a moment, then I sometimes need to balance that out and have some more maybe gentleness and compassion as is appropriate in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Also, not
So,
too much and
but
totally go into that too deep, but have this balance between the things.
exactly, and both of these are in fact a change of attitude. The change of attitude at one level is that it is in fact okay for us to feel this way,
Hmm.
and it's okay for us to see these feelings. And that getting jacked off about these feelings is only making things worse, not better. So
Right.
having the angry mother yelling at the angry child is not going to help.
Mm.
Mm. That
Yeah,
we
it's
need.
partly.
Okay, so we need that adult part of the brain to step in and say, "Mom, you need to cool off first."
Mm.
And then, in fact, I've seen that with my own family. That in fact, Kitty is hard to cool off by herself. But if I work on Mom, getting Mom cooled off, Kitty will invariably get cooled off before Mom does.
Mm.
And so that's the way that I'm working with them because they'll get angry and hot at each other from time to time. Now, if I was an ordinary daddy, I'd jump into it and get angry myself, and off the three of us go.
Mm.
But being smart enough or wise enough or sharp enough to recognize I don't have to feel the way they feel. I can feel the way I want to, which is basically right now. Ha ha! Look at what you're doing, Mama.
Noble daddy.
Yes, so that's the way that we begin to see it for ourselves. Is that aha, I see you is exactly what the Buddha said to himself when he was going through that transformation at Bodh Gaya. That 6 week period is when he said, I can see you, Mara. And so we begin to do that right now. You can see those feelings. I see you, Mr. Bad Feeling. I see you, Mara. That's exactly the practice that the Buddha worked with himself so that he began to understand his own mind and how to be free from that stuff.
Mm.
So you've got a good example of how to do that. And that is, I see you. And in fact, not just saying that little phrase, but actually do the investigation,
Mm.
the deeper seeing. Look at it closely, recognizing this is not me, this is just a feeling. This feeling probably has a body component. Where does it feel this way in the body? Is this the source of it? Can I breathe into that? Can I play with it? Can I move it around? If I found where it is in the body, can I move it?
Mm. That's an interesting one.
Can I make it bigger? Can I make it smaller? This is now a toy to be manipulated rather than something that runs your life.
Mm.
And so all of that fits under that classification of, aha, I see you. I see you clearly. And by doing so, you become free from it. And when you become free from it, now it's got no more purpose and it understands that. That's when it becomes much more settled but real. But right now, it comes up because of it being in the habit of coming up. And so, what we're talking about here is very classical NLP. It's also very classically Freud, but is even more classical, way deep down classical Buddha. This is the teaching of the Buddha that our past is not our present, to stay out of the past. And in this regard, it's just not just to stay out of thoughts of the past, but stay out of the feelings of the past.
And
And this is how we do it, is by investigating, noting it,
mm.
seeing it clearly. And that's what you do with it. You begin to chase it around, play games with it, make friends with it, even.
Mm.
In a way, it's kept you alive all of these years. If you didn't have those feelings, you'd have been dead a long time ago.
Mm.
So they've got some value. So we need to see those feelings as friendly, but not the boss.
Yeah. I feel like when I did, how do you call that, samatha sort of practice from the mind illuminated a lot, I somehow hit a ceiling there. I couldn't really get very stable attention, and I feel like I was constantly fighting against the hindrances without really understanding them. So maybe I was barking, I was putting in a lot of effort, I think.
A
Uh,
lot of students put way too much effort in.
yeah, so I think I understand a bit better now why, what was in my way, and how I can deal with that better than in the past.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes. Okay. So opening the wisdom eye gives you a new view of actually that this is fairly simple, but it does require a change in attitude and an adjustment to our energy or our effort. But most importantly, we need to keep practicing this over and over and over and over and over again. We need to develop this sati. We need to remember to look at these feelings rather than just being torn apart by them.
Hmm.
But we wake up to them and say, aha, I see you. And that's the wake up. To wake up over and over and over again. That's the skill, the primary skill that needs to be developed. The sati. Wakey, wakey. That one's one I like a lot. Wake up. I remember talking about this to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, but I use the phrase, if at first you don't succeed, try again, which is the way that most people practicing meditation. And he recognized that. And he says, oh no, if at first you don't succeed, look at what you're doing.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's really, we have to come out of that trying. Try again, work hard, never mind that I failed, start again is much better if we have the attitude of never mind, keep looking. Yeah, the mind wandered away, but let's not worry that it did wander away. Let's be happy that we caught it wandering away.
Yeah. It's really like understanding, setting in right instead of bashing your head against the same wall
Mm-hmm.
over and over.
Precisely so. Now, people who are not working hard enough, they're the ones who they call it choiceless awareness, where they're stuck in hindrance, but that's okay. So they just wander around in hindrance. So the analogy that I would use in that regard is imagine in the mind, or imagine that the mind is imagining an actual road, and that there you are standing on the road. Maybe it's got some trees around it or whatnot, and now we look down the road, and there comes a big truck, perhaps a big lorry burning right down on us. Now, we got several choices to make. One of the choices that we can do is we can stand there and let the truck run over us. Another thing we can do is we can stand there with our hands out, telling them to stop, or maybe even Popeye style, put our fist out, hoping that we're going to, crash the thing and it's going to stop right here because my will and my big fist is fed with spinach is going to stop it. But the third option, and this is both the one is too much effort trying to stop it, and the other one is not enough effort letting it run over you. But the third option is merely stand out of the way. Just merely stand out of the way. Don't try to force this thought to do anything. But the way we stand out of the way is going back to what the Buddha said to himself. I see you, Mara. I see you, Mack truck. And as we see that truck, we stand out of its way and let it pass. We clean the mind out right then. This is a way of thinking about it for thoughts. And eventually we apply that way to the feelings. That in fact, these feelings that you're talking about look like and feel much more like a Mack truck, especially when you're hit with it.
Mm.
And so what we have to do is sort of stand out of its way. We don't want to try to stop it. We don't want to try to control it, nor do we want to get run over by it where it's ruling our lives. We merely want to stand out of its way so that we can take a look at it while it's passing by.
Mm. I think it's when I was at the Goenka retreat about a month ago, they talked so much about equanimity, and that was also real eye-opener. I really understood better this time what that does, because it allows you to be with it instead of fleeing from it or trying to push it away. But that way you can also actually look at it and see,
Mm-hmm.
I thought I wanted this or that, I want to go away from the retreat, but actually my back is just hurting and I'm trying to.
Exactly so. So in this regard, we sort of just, all we do is stand out of its way. We don't let it run over us,
Hmm.
but we don't try to stop it either. We just let it be there, but it's not me there. It's not me that feels this feeling. It's just the feeling that's there,
Hmm.
in a way, trying to create a self or an owner for it. But right now, no self is being created. No formal relationship between owner and ownee is happening right now. Why? Because we're wise to that game. That
Hmm.
feeling will not control us by making us own that feeling. I am that feeling, because we're not that feeling. So this is where Buddhism is really so valuable. The teaching of the Buddha is anatta. You are not that feeling.
Sometimes I feel, and when I think about that, like there's so much to pay attention to, and I get a bit overwhelmed already by
But
everything that I
but you
could.
are not that which got overwhelmed. Just note, oh, overwhelmed, the alarm is going off. There's so much happening, and now we add an alarm to make even more happen. And so we just put that in there, take another deep breath, and recognize, yeah, but I can handle it all.
Hmm.
I can handle all of this stuff, including the feeling of overwhelmed, because I am not overwhelmed. It's just a feeling of being overwhelmed.
Hmm. So maybe it's helpful for that to try to break it down a bit into the, like that would be restlessness, like worry and remorse as a hindrance, I guess, to
Yes,
have
that's
vocabulary.
the that's the those are the labels that the Buddha puts on these things.
Because if you try to find the perfect label for every train of thought you have, then it's easy to get lost in it too.
Well, that's because of the inadequacies of the language. You see, the language that humans have developed is a language of nouns and things. We don't have an adequate language yet to describe feelings. We never developed that language. But poets have been working at it for years and still they're failures at it.
Because you could always describe it better, you mean?
No, I'm saying that we don't have an adequate language to describe feelings. That's why I talk about them in general. In fact, I don't even until you use the word overwhelmed, but that's the word overwhelmed will be then the word that I use to point to the feeling. But the feeling itself is not overwhelmed. The feeling itself is no label for it. So we inaccurately use the word overwhelmed when in fact overwhelmed is not a feeling. All the words we have that we use to describe feelings are so inadequate, they never get around to the right thing. That's why we're all so confused about how each other feel. It's because we're using language to describe it
Mhm.
instead of seeing it directly. So when you talk about overwhelmed, perhaps you can actually talk about sensations and feelings of pressure on the shoulders, perhaps the neck hurting a bit, giving sort of the image of Atlas carrying the world or a big heavy burden on the back.
Hmm.
Okay, so these are the actual then translations out of the word overwhelmed into an actual visual image that's pointing towards the actual feelings that are involved. but the actual feelings involved cannot be spoken. We can only tell a story and use Atlas and imagery, but we really don't know how Atlas felt. We don't know how you feel when you feel overwhelmed, because all you can use is the word overwhelmed, and that doesn't help.
Yeah, the word doesn't have the tactile feeling of the feeling.
But we have to understand that our language is inadequate, and there's nothing much we can do about it. But what we can do then is teach the Dhamma in a way, conceptualized way, so that the students get kind of away from the concepts and right down to the real experience of it, so that you deal with these feelings that we're talking about, whether we've even labeled them or not. We don't need the label of the feelings. We just put it in that general category, and then we treat it like that, that this feeling is not me.
Hmm. Oh.
That's the most important of the aggregates. Later, we begin to understand also consciousness and not me, perception, not me. Even not only are those feelings not me, but the residue from the past that create these feelings now, the sankhara, the old sewer system of the mind, is still not me. But I'm none of those things. Who am I? Well, when I'm human, I'm not much, but I'm brilliant at it. And when I am in me, it's because I'm in some woeful state of bad feeling. That those are the two choices of a self that I have, is either in hell or in great wanting or in the state of being fearful or in the state of an animal. Those are the choices of the woeful states, which are the same as the four modes of clinging, and also associated with the hindrances. Or I can be a self that is a lion, a strong lion who is self-confident and knows that no matter how obstructed the mind gets, I can clean that stuff out and feel really good. My choice. And so for you, you haven't quite gotten to that point yet, but you're going in that direction, that you can take control over those feelings. You can let it aside, say down, boy, take a deep breath, and enjoy your moment. You can do this. I know you can do it, and soon you will too. You will know that you can do this. That feeling is not your boss. It's your pet. You've got a pet alligator on your hand.
All right, I think that's enough to digest for today.
Okay, me too. That's great. This is good. You're making good progress. This is Anapanasati when it gets real. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. All right, yeah, thank you for the talk again, and may the immunity be with you.
Yes, may the farce be with you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.